Good evening, Des Moines. Welcome to the Doc and Lefty program here in the lovely heated studios of webcast1live.com on the Kaleidoscope Hub Skywalk in beautiful downtown Des Moines. This is Lefty coming at you with the program tonight, and with me, nearly as always, is my good friend. He's still eating his freedom fries, perched on the wings of a screaming bald eagle. Dr. Patrick Bertroche. Doc, how's it going?
Hey, everything's going all right with me. How was your gigs last week? They turn out good?
Oh, the gig a couple weeks ago was fine. I got another one coming up here on Friday. Yeah. But yeah, it's rolling right along.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, the other thing I want to say is I wish that when you came out and saw your shadow here about a month ago, that you would have just said, "Hey, listen, winter's over."
Here's the funny thing about that. If you couldn't tell, I'm rocking the pink shirt. Right?
Yes,
the pink underneath the sweatshirt.
It looks white on the screen, but
right.
It's pink.
Well, hey, no, that's fine. I'm rocking the pink shirt because I'm feeling extra cocky. And the sweater and a pair of pants that I haven't fit into in a couple of years. So when I crawled out of because I've been working out like a fiend over the last few weeks.
Good. Looking good.
Thank you. I came out of my shadow in early February. Let's say on or about February 2nd, let's say. And I looked out and I saw my shadow and I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep this winter around because this cold temperature is helping my calorie burn, and I'm going to become a skinny groundhog by the next time this groundhog day rolls around.
I certainly hope so, because I'm going to tell you, weather forecasters are kind of worthless. Nah, don't get me wrong. I like Ed Wilson. I do. He's a character. Last week, it's going to be 50s this weekend, 50s this week.
He couldn't. No one else was saying that. That can't be true.
Well, my phone was saying it. A couple other people saying it. Weather.com was saying it. And then all of a sudden, bap, right in the face.
You know what's funny? You know what's funny about this conversation before we go into the first break here? What? Iowans are so fun. I was a couple of my friends were in town over the weekend. They're piano players who do the dueling piano thing. I only get to see one of them basically once a year. He runs a bar down in Gainesville, and my other friend brought his very lovely fiance with him. She's from Idaho originally. So born and raised in Idaho, lives in Boise. And he and some of the listeners who saw the interview with my friend Pappy, that's who I'm talking about. My friend Pappy from Colorado brought his fiance from Boise, Idaho. And the first thing, trying to make conversation with her, we didn't really have much in common besides him, and he was working, so I had to kind of try and talk to her a little bit, was the weather. Iowans, we go straight to the weather. Every time. Isn't it? It is so crazy. I bet you've never seen weather like this in Idaho, have you? Well, we have mountains and snow, so yeah, I have actually.
Yeah. Well, what they don't see is howling 60 miles an hour winds,
and then completely nice 20 minutes later. I got it
clear.
Yeah,
yes.
It's and here's another funny story about the weather before we go on to the actual meat and potatoes of the show. I recently moved. I moved over to
the good side of town,
the north. Yeah, the north side, the northeast side ish, over by North High.
Yeah.
And not too close, but over by North High. No, just kidding.
Because you don't want to be that close to North High.
And we moved in next door to a guy who's been living in his home for 40 years. And those are the best kind of neighbors. Well, this second only to you, my friend.
Yes.
And he's a 78-year-old guy who is a hoot and a half. And I was out, and we're coming home. Megan and I were coming home from grocery shopping, and he's really polite to her. He's always been kind of short and gruff with me, very polite, chatting her up like an old flirt. So he starts the conversation off by saying, "Oh, who ordered this snow? What about this?" Kind of doing the old Iowa complaining thing about the weather. And I made the comment of, "Can you believe that it was just 40 the other day and now we have snow again? That's just crazy." And after he commiserated with my girlfriend about the weather, I make this comment off of his conversation starter, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, it's Iowa, boy. Love it or leave it." Well, I think, put me in my place like none other.
I think he's sweet on your girl.
Well,
that's what I think.
Who wouldn't be?
That's right.
You've met her.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to also tell you, this is an interesting thing that I saw one day as I was looking up the temperature on Mars, because I always like to think that we're warmer than Mars, but there's been days we have not been warmer than Mars. You
Me.
might have seen weather like this when you're a kid. Frank has never seen weather like this, ever. It has been at least 25 years since we've had a winter this bad with the temperatures,
consistently.
with the snow, and all that other stuff.
Well, remember, 25 years ago, I wasn't in Iowa yet. I was still in South Dakota, but my parents tell me that I was born in one of the worst blizzards that Sioux Falls had ever seen, the blizzard of '82.
That explains the skin tone.
Well, hey, I got to blend in.
Yes,
this is
it's
a
survival mechanism,
a fight or flight response, and I have small hands
because you're a chameleon.
That's right. That's right. I got to blend in.
So anyway, well, it's break time. After we get back, we're going to get to the meat and potatoes of the show, and because apparently meat and potatoes, and obviously he's on a diet, and I've been on a diet, so we're hungry.
I'm starving.
Yes,
actually.
So we're both starving. Frank, you better watch out, man. We might resort to cannibalism. Anyway, we'll be back right after the break. Stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in to watch the show. We'll be back to discuss some international news. It's going to be important to Americans everywhere.
Petrosian Associates, how can I help you?
Bertroche and Associates will provide you with a friendly, caring, and confidential place to find help for mental health concerns. We are ready for your call. Our doctor, Dr. J. Patrick Bertroche, provides a full range of psychiatric services for children, adolescents, and adults in a forthright and informative manner while maintaining a casual, comfortable, and relaxed atmosphere.
All across America, there are countless numbers of people struggling with addiction and other life-controlling issues. Probably someone you know and love. There is a way out. There is hope. Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida, has a unique approach to substance abuse treatment. Call now and ask about our Guaranteed Success program or log on to transformationstreatment.com. Transformations. Change your life. Change your relationships. Transform your world.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We have, I would say we're looking globally today because once again, the world is in a tailspin. Although it seems like there's a lot quicker resolution. Of course, I'm talking about Ukraine, just so we can get that out in the open. And we actually have a resident expert. My good friend, Doc over here, is a well-worn traveler of Ukraine, knows Ukrainian politics inside and out, knows the people really well, knows the lay of the land, and has some interesting perspectives about the relationship with Russia. We've talked about Ukraine before in the past and his connection to the country. But just for a refresher, if anybody is like me and only listens to their news on podcasts and is always perpetually a day or two behind, the conflict in Ukraine that broke out a few weeks ago that left, 30, 40 people dead.
The entire thing has left hundreds missing, and I believe hundreds dead.
Disappeared.
Yeah, but this last weekend, the death toll was 80.
Was 80?
Yeah.
I had heard that the initial reports were in the first clashes it was 12 to 20 and then 24 or so.
That was Friday, then it escalated on Saturday and
this is how fast moving this whole thing went down. So we have back in September the pivot away from the EU, and the people flooded the streets. They went out into Maidan, Independence Square, I think is yes. What it is in English. Went out and were protesting the decision, and the country there was no clear consensus in the country, and that's not to say that Ukraine wants to be a Russian puppet. I'm saying that Ukraine is a split country. It's got two brains about this situation. And so it was cast in Russia as, the elites and the nationalists in Kiev are riling up everybody, and you good folks here closer to the border over in Crimea and that region.
Yes.
Not as bad of a situation for you guys, and you should, kind of help us fight this off. Well, the government, an old KGB. Well, actually, no. Yanukovych wasn't a KGB guy. He was a warlord. He was one of the old rebels who fought against. He even fought against the Russians back in the day, I thought.
No, he's just a scumbag and murderer. and was one of the original oligarchs when the wall fell.
Oh, sure.
And part of the problem here with all these countries that we're talking about today, they have one thing that's a problem, that's their property rights. And so we'll discuss that a little later.
But so Yanukovych, who is a scumbag and murderer, as my friend here said, surprise upon surprise, heavy-handed response, starts putting soldiers in the streets, starts having them kill people. Although the BBC is reporting a little bit of confusion on whether there were actual shoot-to-kill orders for the snipers, that they haven't been able to confirm that. So I don't want to cast the more brutal aspects as something that was ordered from on high, but it certainly doesn't look good for Mr. Yanukovych, who was deposed and has fled the scene. They don't know where he is. He's in Crimea. Well, that's what they think he is. But Yulia Tymoshenko, your good pal, has been released from from jail. The government has been pretty much dissolved, with the opposition to Yanukovych firmly ensconced in power. And this thing, except for the Russian element, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, has been a little bit not resolved. That's not the right word, but the situation is a lot calmer and a lot less dangerous for a lot more people than it was even last weekend.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of go through this weekend what happened. The EU comes in, brokers a deal that basically doesn't do anything, because the EU and the Western powers are good at brokering deals that don't do anything. And as they're doing this, I mean, they're not calling for parliamentary elections. They're not calling for for Yanukovych to step down, which are the two demands that the opposition had finally said, this is what we need. They started out by saying, listen, we want you to sign this agreement. And then it escalated. So this weekend, they signed this agreement. Everybody's talking about, well, at least it's a ceasefire. And then there's a fella named Volodymyr Parashuk. And he grabs the microphone. They're all up there talking, all the opposition leaders. Vitaly Klitschko is the most famous of them all. And this guy gets up there and he starts talking about the friends that were just killed, that he misses. And then he says, we're not going to accept this truce. You need to step down, Mr. Yanukovych, or you will face the consequences tomorrow. The next day, a bunch of people getting shot in the street, and off Yanukovych runs. Now, the one thing is they didn't really know where Yanukovych's, palace was. So nobody knew. They finally found it, and they get there. I mean, on Sunday, they're there wanting to take heads, and he's gone. He goes to Donetsk, which is where his power base is. The people in Donetsk won't let him leave. They're like, no, you're staying here. Parliament impeached him. Now, the problem with this thing that's going on now is the Constitution that they follow doesn't allow for an immediate removal of the president. He has to be incapacitated in some way. He has to step down. He had to be dead, or he has to be impeached, in which case they will appoint a special prosecutor and then they'll investigate. So the fact that they have somebody already acting as president is going to cause a problem with the Constitution, especially since they re-established the Constitution in 2004. Now, one of the things I found was very interesting is back in November, when this whole thing started up, Yanukovych called in the troops. The army's been there the entire time. I'm sure he's issued orders to shoot these people, and the army has said, we're not going to. We're here to protect the public buildings. Now, he had the head of the Berkut. He had him fired because the Berkut is their secret police, and they wouldn't fire on the citizens either. He replaced him, I think it was 10 days ago. The new guy, he's out there. I'm sure he gave a kill order, although, Lefty's right. We need to wait and make sure. But I can tell you that I have firsthand personal accounts from reliable sources that the people in the Maidan were under fire if they were out there. The entire Maidan cleared. You don't see any pictures of this going on. All you see is people getting shot trying to walk along the street. That's really, they're out there looking for Yanukovych to have him face war crimes. There are hundreds of journalists that are missing or dead. There are several journalists that I know personally with assassination attempts, right? There's no other word for what's happened. So even though things have settled down, things are not calm. All
They're
right.
not, and they're not over.
And they're not over.
There's there was a report on public radio yesterday talking about how folks in the opposition on the streets are still going around and giving interviews, and when they give interviews or are seen by any national news outlet, are still wearing ski masks because, as one analyst put it, they don't want to be identified by the Russians when Putin decides whether or not he's going to send tanks in to crush the opposition and reinstall his if it's not
It's not a coup.
Well, hold on. I can't. What was his name again?
Yanukovych?
Yeah, Yanukovych. Gosh,
Right.
I had the Y, but I couldn't come up with the name. If reinstall, if not him, then one of his cronies, and that's the real fear from the reports that I've heard. That's the real fear on the street with the opposition is that no, I didn't want to say that it was resolved or settled. I wanted to say that the initial ouster of this guy was done, and he's gone, that no one can find him. He's still he's popping up every once in a while calling himself the president, but he's gone. Russia's calling it a coup. Russia's saying everybody better back off because we're going to do something, but no one knows what it is. Here's my question to you that we'll get to right after the break.
All right. Well, we'll be back right after the break. Listen to Doc and Lefty here on webcast1live.com. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be right back with Lefty's very important question.
Hey, psst. Let me let you in on a little secret. You ready? Always try to do business with people, not places, especially if you seek honest Christian business people. And when it comes to my car, I really need to trust who's working on it. Now, my family is so blessed. A few years ago, we found a family-owned automobile repair shop that operates as a Christian business also. Open, honest, reliable, trustworthy. It's AMCO on Hickman Road in front of Kmart, and it's a family-owned Christian operating business. This family treats your car as if it was their car. Everything from oil changes to transmission repair and everything in between. So the next time you feel the need to be at peace with your choice of who you can trust with your car, give AMCO on Hickman a chance to serve you. And tell them Max sent.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the first couple of segments, and thanks for sticking around with us for this hour. This is the Doc and Lefty program on webcast1live.com. We certainly do want to thank our sponsors, Petrosha Associates, Labinas Law Firm. I want to thank all the sponsors that help keep the lights on, and our producer in fine silks and linens. And just want you to pay attention to the ads and patronize those places. They're all local businesses, and that's all I have to say about that for now. My question to you, Dr. Bertroche.
Oh my God, now I feel like an authority.
Well, we have a situation where all the international observers are mostly concerned, I don't want to say all of them, but mostly concerned that Vladimir Putin is going to do something militarily with respect to what the Russian media and the government are characterizing as a coup. Two questions, I guess. One, is it right for them to call this a coup, given the other international things like in Egypt and Libya and so on, in the past? And two, what are the political calculations you think are going through Putin's mind about whether or not to roll tanks into Kiev?
Well, that's a complicated issue. And the truth of the matter is this afternoon, Angela Merkel, who's, runs Germany, called President Putin, specifically to talk about Ukraine and how Russia needs to stay back and not interfere. Russia has said the same thing to us. Here's the reality. We don't need Ukraine. The United States doesn't need Ukraine. We don't. We're not willing, we're not going to be willing to send troops over there to die. We saw that in Georgia. That was very clear. The Russians have a habit of flying over Ukraine along the border anyway. They're always threatening them. They cut off the oil. They cut off the heat. They do all kinds of stuff. Now, nobody, and I mean nobody, is sad to see Yanukovych go. Putin isn't. The Russians aren't. Nobody's sad to see him go. What really is at stake is self-determination. Are they going to go back to the Russian way, which is dependence, or are they going to go towards the European way, which is freedom and independence? That's a decision that you have to make, that they have to make. And honestly, this is not really a civil war. I would call it, what this is people protesting their government. Keep in mind that the parliament, which has the power to impeach the president, impeach the president. That's not a coup. It would be like, President Clinton being impeached. Some people can say, well, maybe it was a coup, all this other stuff. He was impeached, and then he was allowed to stay in power. The process now is, since Yanukovych is gone, who's running the country? Well, they have essentially the speaker pro tem of the parliament given these executive powers under an emergency law. Putin is a smart cookie, and he's a steely-eyed SOB. He's been facing off from a position of weakness against the United States for easily the last 15 years. And for the most part, he's won most of these contests. He won the contest in Syria. He's winning the contest again in Syria. He won the contest in Georgia, right? And any time that we go over and try to mess in his bailiwick, he outmaneuvers us. Now, that's Bush, it's Obama, that's Americans in general, because we truly don't understand how they think. And we talk about that a lot.
Well,
cultural psychology.
Well, and I want to ask you this, unless I'm going to interrupt, you're on a roll, but
I am a little bit.
But I wanted to ask you that because did he really win anything with Syria specifically? There's still 100,000 people dead or injured over there, or 100,000 refugees. I don't think the number is that high of the casualties, but 100,000 refugees. It's a complete international disaster. And
not for the Russians.
Well,
the Russians are over there still trading with one of the economic powerhouses in the Middle East that produce a ton of chips. Syria is the Silicon Valley of the Mideast.
Well, so
so they're still trading. They're still getting oil. They're still shipping arms to them. They're making a bundle on these arms. So from the Russian perspective, they're winning because they don't care about the loss of life. They pay lip service to it. But you're talking about an army in World War II that cleared minefields by walking a battalion of men through it.
Well, sure,
that's the same. It's the same attitude now.
But once, I guess the larger question though, as we talk about them facing off and winning, it was John Kerry through.
Well, I don't want to get
sidetracked
sidetracked off of Syria. That's not
okay. Fine. But you talk about Putin winning these contests, and no one is willing to ever negotiate with him from the Western side anyway, and everything else is sort of imperialistic kind of power and threats and
yeah. Because how do you negotiate with a guy who uses imperialistic?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what does he really win when we don't?
Well, he wins
deal
influence.
with him.
He wins influence in these countries.
He had that influence anyway.
No,
he didn't win anything new.
Now, Saakashvili was a prominent Russian diplomat, and after the wall fell, he went and gained power in Georgia, and he distinctly went west. He went, I'm not going to be around. Who knows who fired the first shot over there, but this is what they did. The Russians had already given citizenship to the people of Azkaban. I can't ever remember, but it's Abkhazian or something like that, and South Ossetia. So now they have justification going to protect their troops. They have effectively annexed those countries. They have joined the Soviet Union. That's what they do around. Transnistria is a little crappy country between Ukraine and Moldova. They've done the same thing there. He wants influence. He wants to return, not necessarily the Russian Empire, but a strong Russia. The problem is he needs us to do that, so they blame us for everything, right? Mm-hmm. The official word is, we're the rabble rousers. We're the ones that caused all this. And this is a common phrase. They use it in Thailand, and they're using it in Venezuela. They used it in, every time you had a despot in the Middle East. So really, Putin has two options, and he has to be very careful. He can either continue to do what he's done, which he's been reasonably successful at. He just picked the wrong idiot to do it in Ukraine. or two, he can militarize things. This is what nobody knows. The Russian fleet is already based in Crimea. I mean, the entire economy of Crimea is based upon the Russian military presence. There's 26,000 troops in Simferopol itself. And I don't know how many troops are other places. And he just got done landing another 200 Special Forces troops earlier today. These are unconfirmed reports, but there's a lot of pictures out there about these troops landing. If he really wanted to militarily invade Ukraine, that would be the end of it, right? Ukraine does have the ability to fight back. They do have a very good military. It's just not Russian military. It'd be like us taking on the Canadians. Don't get me wrong. They're good. They're great fighters. They're just not going to be able to stand up. The problem is Germany has said specifically that we are willing to intervene in any kind of military option. We already have people putting pressure on Obama to say the same thing. The French have stayed out of it. The Italians have kind of said, we support the Russians. Moldovans have come straight out and said, we won't tolerate a sovereign country being attacked. So you're looking at Putin either taking a stick and smacking the table and hitting a shoe on the table like Khrushchev did, or playing the game he's been beating us at. So I think he's going to play the game he's beating us at. Now, short of them saying, we're going to completely reject Russia and we're going to embrace the EU, I don't think he's going to do anything militarily. He's going to do a lot of threatening, a lot of posturing. There's going to be a lot of flyovers, but he's not going to do anything. One of the things you need to understand is there's a pro-government protest for Yanukovych in Donetsk on Saturday, and later that day, they had 40,000 people show up for an opposition protest. There are some protests in Crimea. You have to keep in mind, we're running right up against the break. So we'll be back right after the break. We'll finish up with Crimea and Ukraine. And after that, we'll start talking about how a lot of these other countries, Venezuela and Thailand in particular, are following the same kind of pattern. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll be back right after the break.
All across America, there are countless numbers of people struggling with addiction and other life-controlling issues. Probably someone you know and love. There is a way out. There is hope. Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida, has a unique approach to substance abuse treatment. Call now and ask about our Guaranteed Success program or log on to transformationstreatment.com. Transformations. Change your life. Change your relationships. Transform your world.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're talking international unrest. It seems like you can't turn around without bumping into a country right now that just is not, I don't know, falling apart's a little bit too harsh. I don't know that Ukraine is necessarily falling apart. You certainly don't think that Venezuela is necessarily falling apart. One of the other countries that's having protests and some violent, heavy-handed tactics from its government. And let's talk about Venezuela for a second, because even though things were not wonderful
let's stick with Ukraine, because I've gotten several.
Oh, okay.
Several
Yeah, go
messages
ahead.
here.
Go ahead.
So, one of our loyal listeners says Putin knows that U.S. won't do a thing to him. I'm going to disagree a little bit there, because you have to keep in mind that Europe is dependent upon Ukraine to pipe all that energy. And Russia is dependent upon Europe to sell that energy to them. I mean, if they can't sell energy to Europe, Russia collapses. That's just all there is to it. The problem is if Russia has control of the pipeline and the oil fields, game over for Europe. They're basically a Russian satellite that time. And that's what Europe knows, and that's what America knows. So if Putin does invade militarily, I would expect to see a military response from NATO. I really would.
Oh, if if Putin invaded, I guess,
Yeah.
sent support. Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then the rest of it is Obama administration cuts military and are standing in the world. And that's an opinion that's shared by a lot of people. Putin is a tough KGB guy and Obama is a liberal wussy. Now, fine, that's an opinion. But then
liberal that argument doesn't hold water anymore. I guess I would tell our loyal listener it's not 1982.
What's funny is another loyal listener sends me this pictures montage of Putin out, chopping wood, riding horses, judo, shooting guns and fishing, bare chested, looking like a man. And it says their guy and our guy. And there's Obama. He's golfing. He's swimming. He's sitting there on the view and eating ice cream. You're like, it's funny. It's not accurate. It's not accurate at all. It's no more accurate than Gerald Ford being a bumbler.
You're right.
Right. So
I sure do enjoy when conservatives are so moon-eyed gaga over the Russian president. Okay, hey, you know what?
This guy isn't necessarily googly-eyed. I mean, he's
more love-ins for Vladimir Putin, and that's fine. My old communist heart really enjoys old school socialist tactics like this.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Ukraine is they're going to spend some time getting this figured out. They're going to start going forward. Part of the thing is Crimea most likely will break away, and they'll do it just the way these other breakaway republics have done. That is, they'll fast track Soviet citizenship or Russian citizenship for the people of Crimea, and they'll take advantage of it and say, well, you can't do anything in Crimea. Part of the problem is Crimea, when the Russians first, took over Ukraine, was a Russian satellite. I mean, it belonged to Russia. And they deported everybody who wasn't Russian. I mean, they just got rid of them. Pooches or whatever you want to call them, they're dead and gone. So now 80% of the population is Russian. But in, I believe it was 1956 or 1958, Khrushchev went, well, you know what? We're going to give Crimea to Ukraine. Well, that'd be like, somebody saying, well, hold on, we're going to give you, Belize. Here you go, U.S., here's Belize. And we're like, it's not really ours. And Belize is going to go, yeah, we're not really theirs. And that's what's going on. That's an attitude down in Crimea. So that is a strong Russian base. But even though that's a strong Russian base, you don't have people out in the streets pro-government protesting. They have people going, the opposition are a bunch of crooks. And, and be that as it may. The other thing is no matter what government is set up, it's going to be filled with crooks and thieves. And that's part of the problem with all of these countries that are having problems. And that is their property rights are not sovereign. And what happens is the government, all these governments can come in and take your stuff. If you have a place and you don't do, like, let's say you have $1 million place on the sea, you're not towing the line like you should with the government, they can come in and take it. If you don't have guaranteed property rights and reinforced by the rule of law that's inviolate, then what you have is chaos like you see in these small countries that don't have property rights like we have. Part of the problem is the wall fell. All the ruthless and wealthy bought the rest of Ukraine, and now they own everything. Well, that doesn't provide a lot of opportunity for the small businessman who, as we know, is a driver of most economic progress. That's essentially what's going on in Venezuela. So now with that segue, have at it.
Well, the Venezuela, it's interesting because it hasn't been getting the kind of press because it only started to ramp up violence in the last couple of days.
Well, which brings us back to a point we make a lot. The press is at fault for a lot of this. How come people have to start dying before it starts making news? Right?
Well,
absolutely.
Well, because here, I have I think what would be an answer that makes sense, at least to me, in that regard, is until human rights are being violated, international human rights are being very clearly violated, and government violence against the citizens is one of those things that you just don't do. Protests and arrests and things like that, especially over organic problems that are organic to the country, like in Venezuela, especially in Venezuela because of the high inflation and the misuse of state resources, things like that. That's not an international story at that point. International reporters are not looking at that very closely until it starts to get ramped up. It starts to get violent. And I mean, it's
until it gets violent, they can't sell papers. That's just the way it is.
Well, what kind of story is it to say, because the BBC was reporting about Venezuela when it first happened.
Yeah, back in October, because it looked like, I think it was October, because they were really talking about, geez, look at the
Nicolas Maduro is going to get thrown out of here, and that hasn't happened.
Well, and it hasn't happened, and he's not that popular. He's not as popular as Chavez, even though he's the guy that left him in the spot they're in. But if you look at the protests, the Maidan is a big area, right? But the streets are curvy. It's tough to get 100,000 people in there. You can't take a really good shot. Right down the middle of Caracas is this wide avenue where it's just impressive looking. So they started covering that. And, the bottom line is it looked like it was going to get violent. It didn't. They backed off. For me, the fact that Yanukovych called out the army and the army said, great, we're here, but we're not going to fire on any citizens, was something that should be newsworthy. Part of the problem in Venezuela is nothing's going anywhere. You have people starving to death with foodstuffs sitting off the coast, not being able to get in to use the ports. They don't have the resources to spend the money to open up the ports and everything else. So, and a lot of this is Chavez's fault, but this Maduro guy has to get it, has to take the blame. The fact that he's still in power and the fact that these protests in Venezuela have not become violent really shows that these people are upset with the government, but they're not necessarily willing to take that extra step and go, hey, we're going to start burning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
you just, what I kind of wonder, and first of all, isn't it kind of nice to have old school, and I know that you'll appreciate this, old school 1980s socialist thuggery villains again. Doesn't that kind of make you feel all warm and toasty for the Reagan era? I know you got to love it.
Yeah.
I know you got to love it. But what's interesting to me is that in these countries where there's a lot of unrest, and especially in a day and age when leaders it is now impossible for leaders to commit these atrocities in secret that doesn't get out for years, for a year or two. It's impossible. Why even take the risk of a heavy-handed, violent rollout like this when really these kinds of public grassroots protests hardly ever result in wholesale regime change.
That's true.
It almost takes the government to respond in a violent overreaction for the rest of the world to throw their moral support behind it, and then that gets certain generals to defect, and then the opposition starts to get armed by people outside the country, and that's when you have these violent coups like in Libya or Egypt or whatever. So why? What's the political calculus in a guy like Nicolas Maduro's mind, who, for all intents and purposes, isn't an idiot? He got pretty far up in Venezuelan politics. What's he thinking, Doc? You're the psychiatrist. Tell me what he's thinking.
We'll hit that right after the break. You're listening to Doc and Lefty on webcast1live.com. Thanks for tuning in and listening to us. I want to thank Lubien's Law Firm and Bertrosian Associates for sponsoring our show. Oh, and also our very overappreciated and underpaid producer, Frank. He said this is what he could afford for lunch today. Man. Anyway, we'll be back right after the break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Get away from us, you mean old credit card. We don't have any more money. We're in trouble now. Save us! Help! Somebody save us! Somebody help! Help! Save us!
Hi, I'm Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of Des Moines. If your credit card's a little too animated, give us a call.
Hooray! We're saved! Consumer Credit! You're our hero!
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Doc and Lefty. We're here every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on webcast1live.com. And tonight we're talking and thinking and discussing globally, but our hearts are still local. So please pay attention to the ads. They keep us in gold teeth and jewels, and we really do. We really do appreciate all the hard work that our sponsors do, and a shout out to them. Now, Doc, I asked you before the break what you thought the political calculus guys like Yanukovych and Maduro make when they know any sort of violent suppression of ostensibly peaceful protests is going to be met with just complete disdain and reaction from the international community. It seems the cost-benefit analysis is completely out of whack in these guys' heads.
Well, you have to keep in mind that, just for the same reason people spend $200 million to become the president, all right? Let's look at it. Obama had a pretty decent life before he became president. Now he's going to be commanding $1 million a speech after he becomes president. Now, I'm not saying that's why they run, but I am saying that's one of the benefits of running. It's the same thing for Yanukovych. Here's Yanukovych has a $75 million house and getting billions of dollars a year in payoffs from Russia.
And the new reports out are about how he personally enriched himself. It's an interesting little tidbit to the story.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, if you read about Chavez down there, he did pretty much the same thing. And that's the problem with all these, third world dictator countries. And I understand Venezuela is not a dictatorship, but, essentially devolved into that because he was so popular. Well, he did a lot of mismanagement. Maduro comes in here. These people, one, crave power and they enjoy it. And two, there's a lot of money associated with it. Even running a little crappy country like North Korea, there's a lot of money and a lot of prestige. You live a lifestyle that, frankly, we can't live. When was the last time you invited Dennis Rodman over and he showed up?
Oh, it was last Thursday, but he just showed up uninvited.
Is that it?
Yeah.
But you get my point.
Right,
that's why these guys do it.
Say, what did you think about the human rights violation report that came out about North Korea? I don't think we discussed that at all.
Well, the truth is I haven't read it. Well, hold on. I did read it, but I didn't read it in depth because what I believe it said, and correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously you've read it. What I believe it said is that, everybody's starving in North Korea and Kim Jong-un is partying like it's 1999.
Well, I didn't read it a lot.
Which is more like 1899.
I meant specifically the highlights about worker conditions, death camps, forced abortions, really, really gruesome stuff that was taken from North Korean defectors who were able to escape and make it out.
Yeah.
And it just...
Well, it's not much different than Kim Jong-il. I mean, we had the same reports. We've been getting the same reports out of North Korea since we drew up the truth, So it's no different up there. And, the trick is people get together there, if you, when you have a despot with absolute control and your choice is go along or die, people have a tendency to go along.
Right.
And if you're able to defect, then you're able to defect. And, if you look at Venezuela, that's still fairly peaceful. People are upset because they don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have basic necessities. And that's because Chavez kind of hamstrung the country's economy. Maduro is in there. I think it's Maduro.
Yep.
Is in there doing the best he can to get things back going, but people are upset. He's only been in power not even a year.
Well, he's a member of he's a Bolivarian.
Yes.
Right. He's a member of the revolution. He was handpicked by Hugo Chavez to be his successor to run in the next election. He got elected with an overwhelming majority. Nicolas Maduro did. But what's interesting is that folks that wouldn't dare go against Chavez when Chavez was alive, not necessarily even out of fear, but out of loyalty, are protesting. This is not all opposition protests to the Maduro government. A lot of these folks are old Chavistas from back in the day who are fed up with a stagnant, regressive economy that, frankly, it's tough to see what good choices were made over the last decade.
Yes.
These expansive public works projects were sort of abandoned for lavish handouts to folks, and
the old Soviet style of
really was a tough kind of thing.
Let's talk a little bit about Thailand. Thailand has had violent protests. I mean, they shoot people in the streets. They've hauled off some people, but that really hasn't made the news. But it kind of seems to flare and go away. It looks like the Venezuela's government and Thailand's government are going to remain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
What do you think the chances of Ukraine getting their act together and getting a stable government in there?
That's a good question, because I was going to ask you something similar, because what some people are talking about, and not sort of the more impartial outside observers that or university experts about the region, but a lot of folks on the eastern side of things, eastern ideologically, not necessarily geographically, talking about a partition of the country. A lot of these folks on the Russian side are very, very upset with the thought or the notion that nationalists in Kiev are going to come into their communities and tell them, you can't teach your kids Russian anymore. You, who for generations have been closely tied to Russian culture and the Russian language and the Russian history, but you're in Ukraine and you're going to be Ukrainian or else. And that is some of these opposition folks who are now kind of in power are talking about it, and there is the fear that they're not going to bring in some of their own opposition, some of the Russian folks, and disenfranchise a lot of those Russian-oriented folks. If they do that, they're in huge trouble, because that's half the country.
Yes, and I just got an email from one of our Ukrainian listeners, apparently, and she said that Kiev was the only city that got violent. And that was a show of force. But the rest of the country remained reasonably calm. And she points out that the fact that there was a counter-protest to pro-Yanukovych forces in the West means that most likely they'll all stay together. Now, the one thing the Ukrainians never viewed as their own was Crimea. They've never viewed that as their own. I mean, Ukrainians don't. The Russians do. The trick really is if your livelihood depends on making Russia happy, as it does in the western part, then, you're going to be a lot more circumspect with what you do. One of the things I know is that everybody was so hopeful for the Arab Spring and so disappointed by the results.
Well, and that was a question. The actual question I was going to ask is, do you think this is going to leak over into some of these other old Russian influence, like some of these old satellites? So do you think we're going to see a Crimean or maybe a Central Caucasus Spring?
Well, you won't see a Central Caucasus Spring, but you have Moldova and I can't say Belarus, Moldova and another CIS country who signed the agreement that Ukraine didn't sign. And the reason this is important is if Ukraine doesn't sign that agreement, the entire thing falls apart. But there's Latvia and the Lithuania and the Baltic countries that who have clamored to join NATO, and I believe they're already members. And you have Moldova, who has been working toward it. And after this, they reached out to the EU and said, listen, we're willing to do whatever it takes to get into the EU. You have Georgia stating that we want closer ties. Of all places, Azerbaijan has said, well, we would like to be able to get along with Europe and the Western powers. So that's definitely a domino effect. The problem is Putin knows when to strike. He's pretty good at his timing. And he'll just wait and he'll bring everybody back into line. He doesn't have influence in Thailand, but he does have a tremendous influence in Syria. But Venezuela does quite a bit of trading with the Russians as well. And it's strange to look at all these places going up in flames because, one of the conspiracy theories that's out there is that the Russians are actually creating this so that they can gain more power and get a foothold in there. The strange thing is Maduro in a single speech blamed the U.S. for meddling in his country and then turned around and asked us for help in negotiations. And that just seems to be the way it is. Russians always blame us. All the CIS countries blame us. So, the trick really is going to be what the Constitution is, how they're going to get the land back from the oligarchs, and how many criminals they can force out. And the Ukrainians have no respect for the rule of law because it's been utilized against them so often. It is not stable or consistent.
Well, do you think that they will be able to successfully partner with the EU at this point, or do you think that that's done? Also, what is the long-term fallout for Putin's Russia over this? Because people are talking about this coming on the heels of Sochi and how Sochi was a fairly decent success for Russia. They were able to put on some games and then win the medal count. All the random bull crap that people pay too much attention to. But this is kind of a black eye. And
it is, especially during the Olympics.
Right. And I wonder what the long-term effect is going to be, or whether they're sitting on their heels because they know it's going to roll back in their favor.
I don't think there's going to be a long-term effect to this. It's really going to depend on who they select as president. If they select Tymoshenko, don't expect her to live long as president. I'll just be straightforward with that. I think if Vitaly Klitschko gets the presidency, it'll be good to go. But it's really strange that all these countries that have changed, that have suffered from regime change, however you want to say it, really have one thing in common. That's very poor land rights. And that's one of the protests that the Ukrainians say. It's one of the things about the Venezuelan opposition leadership has said. It's been a recurring theme throughout the Middle East, and it's a theme in Thailand at this point.
Well, land rights themselves are sort of a fictional kind of thing, because really what they need a government that's willing to enforce or not enforce particular common law. We're lucky in this country that we inherited a pretty unified, solid body of common law that had this tradition of private ownership. And as much as I am a collectivist at heart, private ownership over certain things is definitely a way to stabilize communities, and stable communities mean stable neighborhoods in the country, and it kind of just goes from there. So I hear what you're saying, but it does feel more like a corruption thing than it does than a cultural thing. That these places aren't just naturally sort of non-respected of land rights, and it's just
this is one of the few times Lefty and I made it in an entire show without having a break early to beat each other up or screaming at each other at the end.
I do appreciate it, because I went and I ran a little bit today, and I'm a little tired and a little winded. Yeah, still
good. So we're now, just an update for next week's show. We had such a response to the DHS show that we're going to do another one. Now, we've asked a couple of people to join us, and
we won't announce it yet because I haven't got the email out yet.
We don't have confirmation, but we're going to have some guests next week with, and we're going to talk about DHS again next week. So, if you have an interest in this, that'll be the show to listen to. You had some gigs coming up this week.
I just got a gig over at Saints in West Des Moines, one of my favorite places to play in the summer. Playing there again Friday, 9 to 12. So if you want to come out and have some decent food at reasonable prices and listen to me play acoustic covers of 90s music for 3 hours, that Saints in West Des Moines is a place to be.
All right. Now, real quick, we got a question which I think is pretty cute. What the hell is a collectivist? Real quick.
What's a collectivist?
I think it's a fancy word for communist. But
Well, that's kind of how I meant it. I don't know that that's. I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, you could be a collectivist about all kinds of things. The army is collectivist, for example.
Yes.
One for all and all for one. That sort of mentality. But no, I meant it to mean more of a communistic sort of socialist sort of jab.
Yeah, because we all know the property rights have nothing to do with the stability of a country. Anyway, we're going to be back next week. Thanks for tuning in.
Really, but...
Well, thanks for tuning in. I got the last word in on Lefty. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week.
Hi, I'm Representative Tom Shaw, and I love these guys. Both of them.
Love these guys. Get over here. Love both of them.